Hi, this is Yvonne Galusha, and the purpose of this little video is to focus on Excel workbooks using VBA code. So just the things you do manually, like open a workbook, create a new one, close it, save the contents, or even delete the workbook file, those are the same things I want to discuss in this video. So we're going to have a little scenario that I want you to have in mind. We're going to say that we have 3 different files, and one of them we're going to call macros, and that is the one that contains our VBA code. A second file called data is where you get the raw data from. And then a third file is results, and that's after you're done processing where you store things. So let's go ahead and get started looking at the code. You can see here that I have a public variable, and that is important because as you write more advanced VBA modules, you're going to have several little subroutines, and sometimes they're going to need to access data that isn't the same across them. And so that's when you create a public type variable, and that's what this is. It does not go away when the subroutine no longer is executing. So the assumption is that these 3 files are all in the same folder, and the VBA one has to be open for this VBA code to be executing. Therefore, you can fairly safely get the path where this particular file is located and then use that to find the other files that are needed. This is often done with VBA applications. So right now I'm just outputting the path in a message box to demonstrate that this particular line of code to find the active workbook path is working. Let me go ahead and run the main. And there you go. You can see that my file is located on my desktop, and that is working. So the next step would be to use that file path to open the file. And so I've created another little subroutine called open raw data. Notice in the main, I call that right here. And in that file, first, I need to open it, and I want to basically use the file path contents, concatenate it with the name of the file. Now, I want to point out something that you can run into issues when you're doing the code, whether it's going to be running on a Windows machine or on a Mac machine, because the path notation is different. I'm running on a Windows machine, so it's a backslash here. But you have to kind of realize you can't move VBA code between the two when you get into things like this. The other thing you want to think about is when you open a file, you have to think about where the data is, so you want to activate it. In my case, I've got the data on the main machine, or the main sheet 1, and that's why I've got activate there. And just for the sake of example, I'm also pointing out that sometimes you have to activate a workbook as well. Now that line of code was mostly there for me to just talk about, so I'm going to comment it out. But understand that when you are doing things across different workbooks, you typically will perhaps open it and then activate the correct sheet, maybe get some data copied, but when you then move to another workbook, you have to activate it. Let's go ahead and run this, and basically you should see, perhaps we'll see, we may have to go look for it, another Excel file open. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is minimize so we'll be more likely to see it open. Okay, so we should be able to see it now. And we did. You can see here, it's the data Excel file, and I have some data on sheet 1, and that's active and ready to go. So the next thing we want to do is create a file. I'm just showing you all the variations with workbooks. And so here you see I've got a new sub. I'm calling it in create results. I don't want that message box there anymore. And down here is the sub. Notice the code here. We have workbooks add, and then we say activate the book and save as that path with the name results.xls. So when we run this code is going to open this, and by the way, this is a good opportunity for me to mention that you can get errors. If I were to leave this open and it tries to open this again, my VBA code would crash. So I'm going to go ahead and shut the data file so that we don't get an error right now. My intent of this little video is to show you the basics without getting too off into error handling. We'll pick that up at another time. So now let's run it. We should see this other file. We'll see the data file open again, and then we should see this results file open as well. Click up here, run. Whoops, I have a little problem. Excuse me, let me fix that. I had a line of code there that I don't want to get to yet, and I had forgotten to delete it. So let's go ahead and run this now. So you can see that we actually have both the results file here created and the data file open. So the next step is going to be moving data from the data to the results. Before we get to the actual processing, I put that line of code in that caused me a bit of a problem a minute ago, and let's talk about that. So a lot of times when you're doing this sort of thing where you're processing maybe something from data you gathered overnight, in the morning you get up and you run this thing first thing in the morning, you want to clear out old results because your code needs to start fresh. So you'll want to delete an old file. And that's what I had, a subroutine for deleting the prior results. Now we have one already because we had just run this VBA code and created it. And I told you that if you try to open something that doesn't exist, or if you try to create something with the same name, if you try to delete something that doesn't exist, these things will all lead to problems. So in this case, the normal procedure is to remove prior results. And this is how you do a delete of a workbook file. You basically do a kill. Quite self-explanatory. The principle is the same where you have to designate where the file is at on the disk. So you have to concatenate the file path using the string concatenation operator and combining it with the name of the file there. So calling this is going to remove the prior results file. With that call right there, then it's going to create it like we just talked about. And now we're going to do the processing, and I don't have the close there yet. So we'll come back to that in just a minute. Let's go ahead and look at this copy. So the processing is very simple. We are just going to copy information from the data and put it in the results. But let's look at what that VBA code looks like. And so that brings us down to this subroutine, copy data. So this should be familiar to you if you followed what I've been talking about. We activate the data, then file, meaning workbook data XLSX. Then we need to activate the sheet within that data file. Then you select and copy the range. And all my data is in column A, so you can see I'm just doing something we should be pretty familiar with, range of ranges, and Excel down to get it all the data copied. Well, now you have to activate the results workbook. And then, of course, you activate the sheet that you want to work in within that file. And finally, here is the way we do a paste special. So now if I run this, notice I'm always selecting main because main is the driver. And when you write this kind of code, the main should be at the top. And then they follow in the order in which they are called. That's the way you put your module together. So when I run this, we should see the data moved from data XLSX to results XLSX. Let's go ahead and run it. Oops, let me check what I got wrong. Sorry about that. When I'm doing things on the fly, I sometimes have lines of code that are not supposed to be there. So let me go ahead and close this file again, and we will start the whole little program. Darn it. Well, maybe it's a good thing that I did that so that I can talk about how you can get these errors, that is nothing wrong with the logic in your code, but it's because these files aren't exactly in the state that you thought they were. So what happened was I had started this and I had a line of code, recall, where I was contrasting here, having the, up here, I was showing you how to activate a worksheet as well as activate a workbook, but I had not removed that line of code when I copied and pasted to start adding. So then what happened was I got the results deleted. So when I started it a second time, I got another error because it was trying to kill a file that was no longer there. So that's what caused the two runtime errors that I was getting. And the first one was, of course, I needed to comment out or remove that line of code. But the second one was simply because I had forgot that this had run partially. So I went ahead and decided to discuss that so that you would be familiar with this sort of thing, because it's easy to kind of confused and wonder what's going on. So for now, I know my results file is gone, so I'm going to comment that out, that call, and third time should be the charm in this doing what it's supposed to do. And there we go. And so notice what happened. We are getting this message about the it already existing. So I guess I'd forgotten to remove that, and I thought I had. This is quite the video. Okay, I hope I have my files in the right state. It should work this time. And there it went. So looking over here, we can see results was created, data was moved into it from the data XLS. So I'm going to manually close these, and I'm just not going to save it because the last thing that we need to talk about is saving and closing. So the last addition is another sub, and the purpose is to actually save the results file and then close the other two workbooks, both results and data. So if we look down here at this little sub, this is pretty straightforward. We have a workbooks and then operating on the results file, .save. Similarly then close it and then close the data file. So hopefully, cross my fingers, all of it's going to work as a complete little application. Make sure I'm starting from the main, so I'm clicking up here, and now I'm going to execute it. Oops, not quite. So I forgot to uncomment out the kill, so that's why we got that little runtime error, because now we do have a results file. And I'm starting it fresh, so I needed to uncomment that out so the whole thing runs as it's supposed to. Now, you didn't see anything except we saw the files flash, but you can see over here that we do now have a results file, and if we open it, it has that data in column A just as does the data file. So this is hopefully helpful to help you understand VBA code and working with workbooks. Thank you.